X game, I see. Anyway, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Thunderdome Metal Reviews. I'm very excited. We are doing my pick for stuff you may have missed in 2021, Alien Weaponry's second album. More on that in a moment. But first, let's reintroduce who we are. I am the Dr. David Pizza, and I'm doing great. And with me are my three amigos, Gabe, Tracy, and Ben. How are you, gentlemen?
Great.
Ready to fight Shumagorath or whatever that is on the cover here.
Oh no, totally. I mean, I assume it's English imperialism, dude. Given some of the shit that they say, you're like, no, they're not effing around, man. No, I assume that's the British Cyclops or whatever. Anyway,
entering the pit of snakes.
Exactly.
That's London. The eye is London.
That's London, dude. Anyway, yeah. It's good stuff.
Indeed.
Give me some stats.
You Got 'Em was released on September 17th of 2021. It is their second album, not their debut. It was on Napalm. I don't know where it was recorded. Produced by a dude by the name of Hammerhead. The runtime is 1 minute and 23 seconds, but that's only because they basically released the album with a bunch of radio-friendly tracks towards the end, the radio edits. I'm going to fuck up these names, and I apologize ahead of time. Louis Rahuri Dijong from lead vocals, guitar, and did the original drawing of the cover art. Ethan Trimbath, bass guitarist, backing vocals, and lead vocals on the track Dad. Henry T. Rahwadi Dijong on drums and backing vocals. And Toranga Porowini Morgan Edmonds on guitar and backing vocals on Unforgiving.
And these kids are young enough to be David's children.
How old are they now? Because they formed in 2010.
They were.
So you're right. They were like Silverchair basically when they put out that first album.
They were like 16, 17.
Silverchair is?
Probably not.
What is Silverchair?
It was like an Australian grunge rock band that a couple times this album reminds me of slightly, but that may just be a South Seas grunge influence.
Little bit.
Right?
Yeah, I didn't think of that until you just said that. But
yeah,
I didn't think of that either. But
there's an Australian grunge thing happening here a tiny bit. I assume, Tracy, they got to be in their mid-20s now. I assume they were like 15 when they made that first one.
Well, that came out in 2018. It's only been 3 years, so I think they're still late teens.
Yeah.
Maybe the older brother. I think the older brother is like 3 years older than the other one.
They are definitely young enough to be in my classes.
The oldest brother is what? Well, I don't know when this was released. Let me see if I can find a date on this news release. But at the time of this news release, which is still loading on my phone, the older brother was 19. The younger brother was 17. And is there a? Did they date this?
I think.
I bet you the first album.
I think Henry's.
So they are probably the oldest one is probably about to turn 21, and the younger one is about 19.
Shit, dude. Okay, yeah, no, they're undergraduates. Well, you know what? They put some fine metal into the world twice.
They have at such a young age, yeah.
It's better than the albums I made when I was 19 and 21.
Yeah.
So had you guys heard their first one prior to
this
one?
Yes. I didn't listen to their first one.
I'd heard it because you guys had mentioned it, and then I listened to it again this week because that's who I am as a person. I'm like, let me listen to that first one again. So,
and that first one I think was like the dark horse hit for 2018. Like it came out of nowhere. And it was like, holy
a good album.
Shit. Because I mean,
a very good album.
Shortly after that album, they were, if not on main stage of tours, they were released on the second stage of like festivals and stuff. Like they were immediately drawing.
They're really good.
Yeah.
I think this album is also pretty good. I do think that it suffers a bit in comparison to the first album, so I'll be interested to hear what Gabe's thoughts on it are, considering he didn't hear that one. And I tried not to, I should say, compare it too much to the first one because that's not entirely fair. But, you know, I think all the elements that made the first one so damn good are there. The ideas just aren't as fully developed. And that could be because there was a push, whether by their management or by them or the label or whomever, to get them back into the studio since they couldn't continue to tour or do anything like that and strike while the iron was hot and release another album. And it's not to say that it's bad. It was just not quite as good as the first one. And part of that is because I've been exposed to the virus. You know what I'm saying? And like, not literally, but I've been exposed to the music, and so it didn't have the impact on me. It wasn't as new sounding as their previous album had been, like a South Pacific roots. So
yeah, indeed. I think I think one, the newness had worn off, and two, I mean, they got the shit pandemic out of them, right? Like they were just getting momentum, and then it was all done. And so New Zealand handled it way better than we did, but they weren't going anywhere. So, you know, I'm always cautious because I know things are a bit different now. You know, Ben, you said before a band would spend 5 years on the road getting material for the first album, and then the second album they kind of shut out. These guys are so young. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but I think a little bit, right? Like they were barely even off the. I mean, that album came out in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in the Pacific already by like 2019, it was all done.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of it also is in that first album, they had 8 years. I mean, granted, they went from like 9-10-year-old to releasing that first album, but that's still 8 years that they had of, in a sense, perfecting the craft. And I enjoy that they're using Maori in this context and using it in their songs. I think that adds a very nice additional touch to it.
I'm going to go stronger than that. I think it's more than a touch. I think it is more, I don't want to get into the cult authenticity, but I think it is more authentic even than what Roots was, insofar as they are at least actually grounded in that community. And I have much respect for Max Cavalera. He's interfaced with communities, he's advocated for them, he's fundraised for them, but he's not of those communities. Like, so, and especially on the first album, the attacks on New Zealand society and British imperialism are so fucking savage in a way that I think there's some of that in Roots too, almost even more in Chaos ID, actually, with that Kiowas, right? That awful suicide song.
Yeah. The one, I would say that this is because of, and not to get into the authenticity Olympics or anything, but Simicon or, you know, bands like that. I'm blanking on the name, but the indigenous Mexican band that we listened to. Yeah.
That's Simicon.
Yeah, that was Simicon. So stuff like that, where it is a very rooted community felt, and I agree with you, everything you said about Max and him interfacing, and it's not like it's just a Brazilian. He wasn't used to authoritarian governments, you know, grinding their boot into his community, but it's an entirely different thing that these guys know at a more intimate level.
Yeah, and there are people that, due to like Treaty of Waitangi and essentially fighting the British to a standstill in trench warfare, did not have quite the level of horror that Canada, Australia, the US, in terms of like boarding schools and such. But that being said, you hear on the first album, and someone here too, I mean, essentially this culture is supposed to vanish. You know, they didn't have the mechanisms that they had in Australia, but I mean, it took a lot for this culture to survive, and their situation is still not ideal, even if they are in a better position than Aborigines. I mean, in terms of just, you know, poverty, imprisonment, alcoholism. I mean, this community is, like a lot of indigenous communities, really put upon and just has been wrecked by the majority society. And but it's also very world famous, you know, because the All Blacks, which I'm sure was part of the inspiration for this. One interesting lead in for me is in South Africa, rugby was such an important thing. And, you know, of course, the Springboks were all fucking white people that all look like Matt Damon. So when they played the All Blacks became an ersatz team for black and colored South Africans to root for. That was their, like, yeah, fuck them up. Like, they were hoping they would defeat their own national team. So I was on, you know, in terms of that whole thing, it was a huge part of my time in Cape Town, weirdly. Because some of them still to this day were like, yeah, the All Blacks, man. I mean, just the name. So, and it's an impressive, sort of terrifying thing if you haven't seen it. So, I don't know. It's because we have, this is not the time to talk about Hawaii, but there's, you know, the US there's a whole, as you said, this is sort of the South Pacific roots, and America has its own really messed up, grotesque history that comes very close to this in places like Samoa and the Marshall Islands. So
it's fucking horrible.
Right on top of this. So anyway, I'm just rambling. You know, the point is they are as Sepultura was, and in their own way, pulling all kinds of, international solidarity, anti-imperialism, indigenous activism. There's like so much going on here, and I think they did it with $10. That's the impression I get listening to it. It's one of the few things I'll ding it for. Is the production on is still kind of only okay, in my opinion. I mean, that's they're not Max Cavalera on album number, what was that, 5, 6? But I mean, recording in a castle, that was in Chaos 88. Like, that's not. I don't think this was that. I don't think they went to Wales and recorded in a castle.
Like, I wouldn't be surprised if some of this was done at home or in the home studio.
Probably.
Sort.
Good for them.
Yeah. Because their dad's a musician. He's the one that taught them all. And so I'm pretty sure they have the tools available for them at least to do demo prep and stuff there at home, and maybe finalizing an actual studio in a sense. I think coming into this album, trying like from that first album, it's hard not to compare them though, just because of it's their second album. And that first album was just so fucking well done. I think this one suffers slightly because I think it's missing. That first album, I think, had so much. It was like 90% like indigenous, like native, like polyrhythmic, like rhythm sections and stuff, like in rhythm patterns. And I think they kind of pull back on it on this one a little bit. And I think that slightly hurts it.
I think part of that was probably from touring and being around other bands. And again, it's like, I don't know, Ben mentioned what the label guys are. It's so hard to know because obviously they just vanished into their home studio and we got an album. So there's some of that on here, but I agree. It is more convincingly executed on the previous one. But I'm still going to defend this album. I still think this album is quite good, and it grew on me the more I listened to it. This is one of my favorite albums we listened to this week.
So, Gabe, what do you think?
I'm going to jump in here and say that having not listened to the first one at all, the songs that I liked on here I thought were pretty great. But on the whole, I thought the record was a little bit slow and repetitive for my taste. It's clear that they have a sense of groove, and groove metal is like more of the direction that they're going in. But I think they could afford to sacrifice it for some thrash and like for some real speed and heaviness. I find that in terms of the music, they also just love that syncopation, and it's really just overused at times. Like, you can do something else other than syncopation and have it be interesting musically. Like, it's just one tool. And I think it has to do with just the amount of complexity that they want to get into with that songwriting. What I think is a real plus, though, was the Maori language that they're using on a bunch of the tracks. I think the singing and also like the sort of stuff that sound more like chanting is really, really super effective. So I think that's a big win for them in that department. But that said, the music just isn't all that adventurous, and I think it could be a lot more adventurous, especially considering how long some of the songs are. They need to actually go more places if they're going to produce, I don't know, 6-minute tracks as the majority of the tracks, But that's just maybe my opinion.
I agree. The call and response stuff and the essentially choral stuff is very effective.
And I also agree that the tracks are a little bit too long. And speaking of tracks,
I mean, I can go first if you want me to. Or...
Go right ahead.
So I think it starts good with the 1, 2, 3 punch there with Tito Kawaru, Hatapatu, and Hakai, and Tangaroa as well. Like, a good 4, and I think Blinded is that they released that last year. Now it's such a banger of a fucking song, but I think the album does kind of fall off a little bit in the back half.
I guess I can go next. I'm not going to butcher their language any more than I already have, so I'm just going to give you the track numbers. I like the first 3 tracks. As Tracy said, they were really good. I like track 7 a lot. Crooked Monsters, Buried Underground, I dug as well. I don't think Down the Rabbit Hole is a strong closer, but, overall, despite the nitpicks that we have had and what we've said about it, I really enjoyed listening to this. And this is something that, if it wasn't for the fact that the tracks are so long and the album itself is so long because they did radio edits on the back half of it, I would listen to it a lot more.
I guess I'll jump in here too and say I also enjoyed the first 3 tracks. I liked Kai Watu. I liked Buried Underground. And I actually liked Ihenga and Down the Rabbit Hole as actually ending tracks. It's funny that they included all these radio edits because I thought that a lot of the songs just tended to drag a bit, and I really enjoyed the ones that they did radio edits of. So if you just replace the radio edits with with the sort of original album cuts, I think it would be a much more enjoyable album. But that said, I really enjoyed those tracks. I won't take it back.
Yeah, I assume the label put those on there. Who knows? It's many questions. I like most of the songs on here. I agree that 1, 2, and 3 are pretty strong, and Tangaroa, the title track, is quite good. I think it Blinded, as Tracy said, is quite good. It does drag a little bit, but I think Ihenga is pretty good. Down the Rabbit Hole, so, but I might have actually had Ihenga as the closer, but I think I enjoyed listening to this album a lot, and I didn't skip any of these songs. You could always, Ben, listen to it without the radio ones.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because it would be a much shorter album.
I removed them off my playlist.
Yeah.
See, I just go into the album and listen to it. I don't add them to a
So,
playlist.
yeah, that's what I've had to do lately. So yeah, I would get them too. I'm
I
like, oh, we're
just-
doing this again.
I just maintain a playlist, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna remove the radio edits.
Yes. All right. Time to grade this thing. I'll go first. I'm going to give
Well,
it a B.
I was gonna
I
say
think
it's David's baby.
Yeah, but Ben has spoken.
I have
So,
spoken. No, I think it's a good album. I don't think it's as good as the first album. And while I think the tracks are all very solid to very good, I don't think any of them are excellent. So if that doesn't bump it up to a B+ for me, but I think this is a very good album that I will go back and listen to several more times.
I think this is an excellent album. I agree, it's not quite as good as the first one, which is probably in low A territory, but this is a B+ for me.
I'm right there with David. I think it's an excellent album. Give it a B+ as well.
Yeah, I'm right with you guys too. And I think if I had heard the first record, I'm guessing I would give it a much lower grade. It'd probably be much more critical, but too late.
So you give it a B+ as well. That gives us an aggregate grade of 87 for this album.
Well, it was B+, and I'll take it. What are we doing next, Tracy?
Next, we are doing what you might have missed for 2021 in Inferi Vile Genesis.
That cover art, y'all.
The cover art
Amazing.
is epic.
I've never seen it this big. This is
The
amazing.
cover art is my favorite part of the entire album.
They have fantastic cover art in all their albums.
Because it looks like a mix-up of Little Shop of Horrors and Zombie Invasion.
And Dune.
Yeah.
Well, you know I represent death metal legally and psychically, so I'm super excited about this, obviously.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. Well, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time on Thunderdome Metal Reviews.